The court will now deliver its verdict.
The courtroom had already decided Daniel Carter's future long before Judge William Harrison reached for the gavel. Every headline called Daniel a thief. Every television report described him as the trusted mechanic who stole millions of dollars meant for sick children. The prosecution had presented bank records, financial statements, surveillance images, and witnesses who all seemed to tell the same story. Even Daniel's own attorney had run out of arguments. As the gallery waited for the sentence, Daniel never looked at the prosecutor or the reporters. His eyes remained fixed on one person sitting quietly in the front row, his 11-year-old daughter, Isabelle Carter. She held a small wooden box against her chest so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. It looked ordinary, worn by time and scratched around the edges, the kind of keepsake box most people would never notice. No one imagined it contained the evidence that could destroy one of the biggest corruption schemes the city had ever seen. Just as Judge Harrison prepared to speak, the sound of a chair sliding across the courtroom floor interrupted the silence. Isabelle stood and calmly walked toward the bench. Every eye followed her. Court officers stepped forward, expecting an emotional child unable to accept that her father was about to lose everything. Instead, she stopped a few feet from the judge and spoke with remarkable confidence. "If you let my father go, I'll show you something every doctor failed to discover." A wave of laughter spread across the courtroom. The prosecutor smiled. Several reporters shook their heads. Judge Harrison frowned, believing the child was speaking from heartbreak rather than reality. But Isabelle never looked away, because the answer to why you can't walk has been inside this box for 7 years. The laughter disappeared instantly. Judge Harrison froze. Almost no one knew the unanswered mystery surrounding the accident that had left him in a wheelchair years earlier. His medical records were private, and the investigation had quietly ended without answers. Yet this little girl had spoken as though she knew something no doctor had ever discovered. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Judge Harrison leaned forward and studied the child carefully before finally saying, "You have exactly 2 minutes to convince this court why anyone should believe you." Isabelle gently placed the wooden box on a nearby table. 2 minutes is all I've been waiting 7 years for." Everyone in the courtroom believed Daniel Carter's story had already been written. For more than 20 years, he had owned a small auto repair shop on the edge of town, where neighbors trusted him with everything from family sedans to police cruisers. He was known for staying late to help stranded drivers, refusing payment from elderly customers who couldn't afford expensive repairs, and teaching local teenagers basic mechanics for free every Saturday morning. After his wife, Emily Carter, passed away from cancer 7 years earlier, Daniel raised Isabelle alone while keeping the garage open 6 days a week. Life wasn't easy, but no one who truly knew him ever questioned his character. That was why the charges stunned the entire community. Federal investigators claimed Daniel had stolen nearly $12 million from Hope for Tomorrow Children's Foundation, a charity that helped children pay for life-saving medical treatment. According to prosecutors, money had been secretly routed through accounts connected to Daniel's business before disappearing forever. The financial records looked convincing. Surveillance footage appeared to place him near offices linked to the missing funds. Digital signatures matched his name, and expert witnesses confidently testified that the evidence left no room for doubt. One by one, neighbors who had defended him stopped answering reporters' questions. Customers stopped visiting his garage. Friends who had once shared coffee with him every weekend began crossing the street to avoid uncomfortable conversations. By the time the trial began, public opinion had already convicted him. Only Isabelle refused to believe any of it. She had watched her father work before sunrise and long after sunset simply to provide for their family. She had seen him return wallets filled with cash, repair vehicles without charging struggling families, and quietly donate money every Christmas even when he barely had enough for himself. None of that matched the man described by the prosecution. The more evidence she saw, the more convinced she became that someone wanted the court to stop asking one important question. What if every document pointing toward Daniel had been placed there on purpose? What if someone needed an honest man to become the perfect suspect? That question became Isabelle's obsession. While everyone else accepted the headlines, She spent years searching for answers no investigator thought to pursue. The old wooden box she carried everywhere wasn't filled with childhood memories. It held every clue she had uncovered since she was 4 years old. Looking directly at Judge William Harrison, Isabelle rested one hand on the lid of the box and quietly said, "My father isn't standing here because he stole anything. He's standing here because someone knew he had seen something he was never supposed to see." Those words immediately caught the attention of the prosecutor, Richard Coleman, whose confident expression faded for the very first time since the trial began. 7 years before Daniel Carter stood accused of stealing millions, Judge William Harrison was one of the most respected federal judges in the country. Before joining the bench, he served as a military lawyer, building a reputation for exposing fraud, uncovering corruption, and refusing to compromise when powerful people tried to influence the law. Attorneys admired him because his decisions were based on facts rather than public opinion. Criminals feared appearing in his courtroom because they knew excuses meant nothing unless the evidence supported them. Then, without warning, everything changed. A mysterious accident left him unable to walk. Specialists from across the country examined him. Surgeons performed procedure after procedure. Neurologists reviewed every scan available. Yet no one could explain why a healthy man had suddenly lost the use of his legs. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Eventually, the medical community stopped searching for answers. Judge Harrison returned to the bench in a wheelchair, determined not to let tragedy define him. But privately, he never stopped wondering what really happened during those confusing days inside St. Matthew's Medical Center. Those first weeks after the accident became little more than scattered memories. Strong medication blurred conversations, visitors, and entire days together until he could barely separate reality from dreams. He remembered nurses rushing through hallways, doctors discussing test results, and the constant frustration of waking every morning hoping to feel his legs again. He also remembered a brief power failure one night that sent hospital staff scrambling to restore emergency systems, but the details faded almost as quickly as they appeared. He accepted that some memories would never return. What he didn't know was that Daniel Carter had been working the night maintenance shift at that same hospital. Before opening his own repair shop full-time, Daniel spent years repairing electrical systems, generators, and medical equipment to support his family. Neither man knew their lives had crossed paths until Isabelle began searching through forgotten hospital records years later. While organizing old maintenance schedules and archived photographs, she discovered something investigators had completely overlooked. One image showed Daniel repairing equipment outside Judge Harrison's recovery room on the very night everything changed. Neither man remembered meeting because Judge Harrison was heavily medicated and Daniel believed he was simply fixing another emergency repair. But Isabelle remembered that night. She had been a little girl waiting for her father to finish work before they drove home together. More importantly, she remembered seeing someone else walking toward Judge Harrison's hospital room long after visiting hours had officially ended, someone whose name never appeared in the hospital's records. That forgotten visitor would soon change everything Daniel Carter had been accused of. Isabelle didn't speak immediately. She let the silence settle over the courtroom as every person waited to hear the name of the mysterious visitor. Instead of answering, she slowly opened the wooden box for the first time that morning. The spectators leaned forward, expecting toys, family photographs, or old drawings. What they saw instead was a collection arranged with astonishing precision. Every item had been labeled by date. Every document was protected inside clear sleeves. It looked less like a child's keepsake box and more like the evidence archive of an experienced investigator. Isabelle carefully removed the first stack and placed it on the evidence table. They were hospital receipts, maintenance work orders, visitor passes, and handwritten notes collected over 7 years. Judge William Harrison looked at the dates and immediately recognized one of them. Every document came from the exact week he had been admitted to St. Matthew's Medical Center after the accident that changed his life forever. Richard Coleman tried to dismiss the collection as coincidence, but Isabelle calmly continued. She laid out photographs taken from different areas of the hospital, each showing a hallway, security door, elevator, or maintenance room. By themselves, they meant very little. Together, they formed a timeline. Next came copies of visitor badges issued during Judge Harrison's stay. One badge had been highlighted with a red circle. According to the hospital's official records, it should never have existed. It had been issued nearly 2 hours after visiting time ended, then quietly removed from the electronic system the following morning. Isabelle explained that she found the badge while helping organize old hospital archives during a local history project. Everyone assumed it had been misplaced paperwork, but she noticed the identification number matched an entry hidden inside backup security records that investigators had never reviewed. That discovery led her to years of searching through public records, old newspaper articles, maintenance logs, and financial reports. Every clue pointed toward the same unanswered question. Who entered Judge Harrison's hospital floor that night? And why was every record of that visit erased? The courtroom remained silent as Isabelle placed one final photograph beside the others. Unlike the previous pictures, this one showed the entrance to the rehabilitation wing only minutes before the unexplained visitor arrived. Daniel Carter appeared in the background carrying his maintenance toolbox after restoring emergency power to the floor. Near the hospital entrance, another figure stood partially hidden beneath the shadows, holding an executive access badge that ordinary visitors were never allowed to use. The face couldn't be seen clearly, but one detail immediately captured Judge Harrison's attention. The visitor wore a distinctive silver ring engraved with the hospital's executive crest, a gift presented only to senior administrators. Judge Harrison had seen that ring before. His eyes slowly shifted toward Charles Whitmore, the former hospital administrator quietly sitting in the back row of the courtroom. For the first time since the trial began, Whitmore looked genuinely uneasy. Isabelle gently closed the folder and rested her hand on the wooden box before saying, "This photograph doesn't prove who walked into your room that night, Your Honor. But the next piece of evidence does, and once you see it, nothing about this case will ever look the same again." Richard Coleman rose from his chair before Isabelle could reach into the wooden box again. His confidence, so steady throughout the trial, had begun to crack. "Your Honor," he said, "this has gone far beyond the scope of these proceedings. We're allowing a child to distract the court with speculation instead of facts." But Judge William Harrison didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the evidence spread across the table. Years on the bench had taught him one important lesson. People who possessed the truth rarely rushed to stop questions. People protecting secrets often did. "Objection noted," the judge finally replied. "Overruled. Miss Carter may continue." For the first time that morning, Richard Coleman looked genuinely unsettled. Across the courtroom, Charles Whitmore lowered his head, avoiding eye contact with everyone around him. Isabelle carefully removed another folder from the wooden box. This one contained financial reports rather than hospital records. She placed several pages before the judge. At first glance, they appeared to be ordinary invoices connected to renovations at St. Matthew's Medical Center. But as Judge Harrison compared the pages, something immediately stood out. The same invoice numbers appeared more than once under different company names. Equipment listed as purchased for the rehabilitation wing had never actually been installed. Payments approved by Hope for Tomorrow Children's Foundation had been redirected through contractors that existed only on paper. It wasn't one mistake. It was a carefully repeated pattern stretching across several years. Daniel Carter hadn't discovered the missing money because he was looking for fraud. He discovered it because, as a maintenance worker, he kept receiving repair orders for equipment that didn't exist. Every time he questioned the paperwork, supervisors dismissed it as an accounting error. Daniel believed them at the time. Looking back, he realized those questions had quietly placed a target on his back. The judge requested additional copies of the documents for both legal teams. As attorneys hurriedly reviewed the records, another unexpected detail emerged. Several witness statements used during Daniel's trial directly contradicted maintenance reports signed years earlier. A retired electrician confirmed that Daniel repeatedly reported missing medical equipment assigned to the rehabilitation project. A former nurse recalled seeing senior administrators entering restricted offices late at night after renovation meetings had ended. Another employee admitted that computer records connected to charity donations were altered shortly before federal investigators first arrived at the hospital. None of those witnesses had been called during Daniel's prosecution. None of those reports had been included in the government's evidence. Standing quietly beside the defense table, Daniel slowly realized why. Someone hadn't simply framed him. Someone had carefully removed every fact that could have proven his innocence. The courtroom fell silent once more as Isabelle looked toward the hidden compartment inside the wooden box. "Everything you've seen so far explains why my father was accused," she said softly. "But it doesn't explain why someone erased your investigation." She reached into the compartment and gently lifted a sealed envelope wrapped in faded brown paper. Unlike everything else inside the box, this package carried no label, no date, no explanation. Isabelle held it carefully with both hands before looking directly at Judge William Harrison. "My father told me this could only be opened by one person." The judge frowned as she walked toward the bench and placed the envelope before him. The moment his eyes fell on the handwriting across the front, the color drained from his face. He recognized every letter immediately. The words written on the envelope had been penned by his own hand 7 years earlier. Judge William Harrison stared at the envelope for several seconds before carefully breaking the aging seal. The courtroom was so quiet that the sound of the paper unfolding echoed through the room. As he read the first page, his expression changed from curiosity to disbelief. It wasn't just an official report. It was the original investigative summary he had personally approved while recovering in St. Matthew's Medical Center 7 years earlier. Every page carried federal markings, reference numbers, and signatures from investigators assigned to examine suspicious financial activity surrounding the hospital's renovation project. At the bottom of the final page was his own unmistakable signature authorizing a full criminal investigation. Judge Harrison closed his eyes for a brief moment as scattered memories began returning. He remembered reviewing documents from his hospital bed. He remembered insisting that the allegations deserved immediate attention. Then nothing. The days that followed had disappeared beneath heavy medication, endless medical procedures, and the confusion surrounding his recovery. Somewhere during that period, the report had vanished, and with it, the investigation itself. Daniel Carter finally broke his silence. He explained that while repairing a damaged storage room during the renovation, he accidentally discovered the report hidden inside a box of discarded maintenance files. At first, he believed someone had simply misplaced it. But after hearing supervisors argue about missing paperwork and watching employees search restricted offices late at night, he realized the documents were important. Fearing they would be destroyed if he handed them over without proof, Daniel secretly made a copy before returning the originals to the storage room. Days later, the originals disappeared forever. The copy became the only surviving record of an investigation someone desperately wanted erased. Daniel hid it inside the wooden box before giving it to Isabelle after Emily passed away. He told his daughter that if the truth was ever buried so deeply that no one believed him anymore, she must protect the box until the right judge opened it. Isabelle had honored that promise every single day for 7 years. Judge Harrison slowly looked up from the report and toward Charles Whitmore. The former hospital administrator could no longer hide his fear. Federal agents moved toward him as the judge ordered the immediate reopening of the corruption investigation and dismissed every charge against Daniel Carter, pending formal exoneration. Richard Coleman quietly lowered his head, realizing the prosecution's case had completely collapsed beneath evidence that should have existed all along. Years of lies had unraveled because one little girl refused to stop asking questions. As Daniel embraced Isabelle, Judge Harrison wheeled closer to them and said quietly, "You didn't just save your father today. You gave me back something I lost long before I ever sat in this courtroom." Isabelle gently closed the wooden box, the same box everyone had laughed at only minutes earlier. This time, no one laughed. They understood that the smallest voice in the courtroom had protected the biggest truth. If you had been Judge William Harrison, would you have believed the little girl, or would you have dismissed her like everyone else? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoy powerful stories about hidden truths, unexpected justice, and unforgettable twists, subscribe to Hidden Motives. If this story surprised you, wait until you see what we have coming next.